To my sister Emma, if you ever find yourself lost in the cold, remember this. Fear can either bury you or teach you how fiercely you want to live. I learned that on the ice outside Nome, when the quiet white of Alaska turned red around me. I used to think the ocean was the only thing I had to fear, but sometimes the true predators come from the shadows of the pines, with eyes like yellow lanterns and breath that fogs the air between life and death. I'm not the same man I was before that day, and though my body carries the scars, my soul carries something even deeper. The memory of what saved me when all hope seemed gone. You won't believe how this story ends. It'll shake even the hardest heart and prove that sometimes salvation comes from the most impossible place. The dawn cracked open over the Bering Sea like a broken pearl, spilling a soft pink glow across the ice and turning the jagged mountains into silhouettes cut from iron. I'd woken to the hiss of my propane heater inside my canvas tent, still half dreaming of silver fish flashing in deep, dark water. The wind outside was calm for once, carrying only the faint tang of salt and the whisper of shifting snow, and for a moment I felt like the world might finally let me have a good day on the ice. My gloves smelled like fish oil and brine, and my breath formed little clouds that lingered in the still air before fading like ghosts. I remember how alive I felt, like I was exactly where I belonged, alone in that endless white cathedral. My hands were steady as I prepared my gear, my auger blade gleaming as if it had been honed for ritual. I was humming a tune my mother used to sing when she cleaned salmon in the kitchen. The ice under my boots crackled with small, delicate pops as though testing my weight. I never thought I'd fear a sound so small. But there, under the surface calm, something waited for me, patient as the tide. I set out across the ice, dragging my sled behind me, my boots leaving crisp tracks like ink on white paper, each step echoing in the hush of the tundra. Seals barked faintly somewhere near the edge of a pressure ridge, and gulls wheeled in lazy circles overhead, searching for scraps or fish guts. The sunlight caught on the frost covering my sled's wooden rails, making them sparkle as if dusted in powdered diamonds. I remember thinking how beautiful and cruel Alaska could be all at once, like a woman who smiles while sharpening a knife. The ocean lay hidden beneath 2 feet of ice, silent but deadly, reminding me how easy it would be to vanish out there. My breath tasted sharp, like pennies in the cold air, as I scanned the horizon for signs of movement. I thought the day would be nothing more than fish and the rhythm of the ice saw. But deep in the pines beyond the shore, a pair of yellow eyes blinked open. A shape moved so softly it might have been smoke. My pulse skipped a beat. The wilderness was watching me. I knelt beside my chosen fishing spot and started drilling through the ice, the spiral blades screaming as they bit into the frozen crust, shavings flying up like glass splinters. I focused on the hole widening beneath my hands, hypnotized by the way the darkness of the water opened like an eye. Ice chips clung to my beard and eyebrows, and sweat chilled instantly on my neck. A thin film of frost grew over my mustache, stiffening each breath into a crystalline exhale. I felt utterly alone, as if I were the last man left in Alaska, every sound swallowed by the snow. The ice creaked now and then, with low groans that seemed to echo from under the world, reminding me how thin the border was between life and a watery grave. I glanced back toward the tree line without knowing why, feeling a prickle on my spine. Something rustled there, breaking twigs so soft it might have been the wind. But it wasn't the wind. The scent hit me first, wild, musky, sharp enough to sting my nose. I froze, listening. I straightened slowly, ice auger trembling in my grip, as the noise in the trees grew louder, deliberate, as if footsteps were being placed carefully to avoid crunching snow. The cold seemed to thicken around me, pressing tight against my ribs, and my breath came out in ragged puffs. My mind tried to explain it away, a fox, maybe a lynx hunting snowshoe hares, but my gut knew better. The smell was wrong, like wet fur mixed with blood and earth. I scanned the trees, but all I saw were shifting shadows and the flutter of snow drifting from high branches. My heart hammered so violently I felt dizzy, my mouth going dry as paper. I reached for the knife at my hip, thumb slipping on the frozen grip. A low growl rolled across the ice, not loud, but deep enough to vibrate inside my chest. I couldn't see it yet, but I could feel eyes boring into me, intelligent and assessing. The silence felt like it was holding its breath. I took a single step backward, trying not to make noise, but my boot caught on my sled's rope, jerking it sideways and sending a can of bait clattering across the ice. The sound exploded in the quiet like a gunshot, and that's when I saw it emerge from the trees, a massive wolf, pale grey with streaks of black along its flanks, its fur bristling like static under the pale sun. Its head was low, shoulders rolling fluidly, muscles shifting like coiled cables beneath its hide. The eyes locked onto me, bright yellow, burning with hunger or fear, older than either. A string of frozen saliva hung from its jaws, glistening like glass. It paused at the edge of the ice, nostrils flaring as it tested the air between us. For a second, I felt as though time had stopped, suspended in that thin space where predator and prey recognize each other. The wind gusted, carrying the wolf's scent stronger than before, raw and feral and close. My fingers closed tighter around the handle of my auger, and I knew the attack was about to begin. The wolf lunged so suddenly that my eyes couldn't keep up, a pale blur exploding across the snow, claws skittering over ice with metallic clicks like knives on glass. I screamed without meaning to, the sound torn from my chest as the animal hit me square in the torso, its weight knocking the breath out of my lungs. The impact sent me sprawling backward, my auger flying from my hands and skittering away in a spray of ice shavings. For an instant the sky spun above me, strips of blue and white flashing like shattered porcelain. Its teeth found the thick sleeve of my parka first, jaws clamping down so hard I felt the bones of my arm creak inside the fabric. Hot pain bloomed up my elbow, sharp and electric, and my vision sparkled at the edges. I tried to twist away, but the wolf's grip tightened, dragging me sideways across the ice. My breath came in panicked bursts that felt too thin, each gasp burning my throat. The smell of blood and wet fur filled my nose, choking me as I struggled. I punched at its head, but it barely flinched, eyes locked on me as if nothing else in the world existed. I felt its claws rake my side, shredding my coat and the wool beneath, strips of fabric peeling away like old bark from a tree. Blood welled instantly, warm and slick against the cold air, and I screamed again, half in pain and half in disbelief that this was happening to me. The wolf released my arm only to snap at my throat, jaws scissoring shut inches from my skin, flecks of its saliva spraying across my cheek like freezing rain. Its breath smelled rank and wild, a mix of old kills and fresh snow. I could hear the deep rumble of its growl vibrating through its chest, felt it through my ribs like a distant earthquake. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, each beat echoing in my skull. The world shrank down to fur and teeth and red snow. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs were jelly, pinned under the wolf's weight. I remembered my knife on my hip, but my fingers felt numb, useless lumps of meat. I tasted blood in my mouth, coppery and hot, and realized I was biting my own tongue. A voice in my head kept saying, the wolf's jaws slammed down on my shoulder, teeth puncturing through the thick down of my parka and into flesh, fire exploding under my skin. I shrieked and pounded its ribs with my fists, each blow landing with dull thuds that did nothing to loosen its grip. Its ears were pinned back flat against its skull, eyes wild and glinting with an eerie intelligence that made me feel like I was fighting something more than just an animal. Blood poured down my chest in hot rivers, steaming in the cold air as it splattered across the ice. My vision wavered, dark spots flickering at the corners, but I refused to black out. My entire world became that mouthful of fur and teeth shaking me like a rag doll. I thought of my sister Emma, of how I promised I'd be home for Christmas. The ice beneath us cracked in thin, splintering lines, like glass under a hammer. My screams rose up, raw and shredded, echoing into the empty tundra. I felt a snapping pain in my collarbone, and my head spun with blinding light. I thought I was going to die right there on the ice. A savage snarl tore from the wolf as it shifted its grip, teeth dragging across my skin, leaving long red furrows like hot wire. It lunged again, aiming for my throat, eyes blazing yellow under the harsh glare of the sun. Instinct took over. I jammed my forearm into its mouth, sacrificing flesh to block those teeth from my neck. Its jaws crushed down on my arm, and pain exploded up my bones like lightning strikes. I screamed, but didn't pull away because if I did, I knew it would go for my throat next. Blood streamed from my arm in dark pulses, dripping onto the snow in fat crimson droplets. My other hand scrabbled for my knife, fingers slick with blood and ice. I finally felt the hilt, cold as stone, and yanked it free. The wolf's breath blasted into my face, hot and fetid, while its teeth ground deeper into my flesh. I thought I was going to pass out. But rage and terror fused into something primal inside me, forcing me to keep fighting. I drove the knife up under the wolf's jaw, feeling the resistance of muscle and the crunch of bone as the blade punched into the soft space beneath its chin. The wolf let out a strangled yelp, its eyes going wide, and suddenly its jaws released my arm as blood fountained from its throat. It staggered backward, shaking its massive head, crimson spraying in bright arcs across the snow. My arm hung limp and useless, blood pouring down my fingers in sheets, my pulse roaring in my ears like the surf. The wolf coughed, gurgling on its own blood, but somehow stayed on its feet, glaring at me with furious glassy eyes. I scrambled away on my backside, leaving a red trail behind me, gasping and sobbing, certain it was about to leap again. For a long, frozen second, we stared at each other across the churned snow, predator and prey locked in a silent standoff. The wind whistled over the ice, carrying the scent of iron and fur, and then, impossibly, the wolf turned and bolted for the trees, vanishing into the dark pines like a phantom. I collapsed into the snow, staring at the bloody knife trembling in my good hand, barely able to believe I was still alive. When I came to, I was lying on a stretcher in a blindingly white room, the ceiling tiles above me shimmering as though underwater, nurses' faces drifting in and out of my vision like ghosts. I couldn't move my left arm, couldn't even feel it except for dull flashes of fire each time someone touched it. Machines beeped steadily around me, their sounds so clean and clinical, so impossibly far from the wilderness where I'd left my blood in the snow. I remember the smell of antiseptic and the rasp of a ventilator somewhere close by, and how my own breath rattled like dry leaves. A doctor leaned over me, young, with tired eyes, murmuring words about surgeries and tendons and possible infections. My lips were too cracked to speak, my tongue like leather in my mouth. I wanted to ask if the wolf was dead, but I couldn't form the words. Instead, I lay there, tasting metal and salt on my lips, reliving every second of the attack in a fever loop. The ceiling swam above me in a haze of white lights. All I could think was, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be on the ice. The days bled into each other under harsh fluorescent lights, each sunrise marked only by the way the room brightened through my plastic hospital window. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. Stitched, bruised, bandaged, half mechanical with tubes and wires. The nurses told me I'd lost nearly half my blood, that my left arm would never fully regain its strength, and that I'd been lucky beyond belief to keep it at all. They showed me photos of my wounds, but I couldn't look at them. I stared instead at the ceiling or at the TV tuned to weather reports about Alaska storms, wondering if the wolf was out there still, waiting. Sometimes at night I'd jerk awake, screaming because I swore I could feel fur brushing my face, teeth sinking into my shoulder. The doctors called it trauma. I called it the wolf, still hunting me from the shadows. My body healed slower than they predicted, the stitches puckering into ugly red ropes across my skin. I traced them with my good hand, like reading a map of pain. It felt unreal that I was alive at all. I refused to sleep more than an hour or two at a time, haunted by flashes of yellow eyes glinting in the dark and the wet sound of breath snarling near my ear. Each time I closed my eyes, I smelled blood and wet fur and heard the ice cracking under my boots. People visited from the fishing company, bringing flowers and cards, their eyes darting away from the bandages as if my wounds were contagious. I'd force a smile, say I was fine, but inside I was drowning in a tide of fear and guilt. I kept asking myself why the wolf ran away, why it didn't finish me when it had me pinned, teeth inches from my throat. Did it see something in me that made it spare me, or was it simply too injured to keep fighting? The questions tore at me, louder than the pain in my shoulder. At night, I'd catch myself listening for claws on tile, for the soft rustle of fur moving unseen through the corridors. I half believed it would appear beside my hospital bed, finishing what it started. Weeks later, they discharged me into a world that felt different, as though the light outside had shifted into a harsher spectrum. My breath still caught whenever the wind hissed through trees, carrying that musky scent I could never forget. Friends offered to take me fishing again, but the thought of ice cracking under my boots made me sweat cold. I tried to hide the scars beneath heavy jackets, but people stared all the same. In grocery stores, I caught reflections of myself in freezer doors, haunted eyes peering back, face pale and drawn, as though the wolf had bitten off part of my spirit along with my flesh. I avoided crowds, shying from loud noises, always scanning doorways and shadows. I dreamed of yellow eyes following me through endless pine forests, silent and merciless. My doctor warned me that PTSD would take time to heal, but I felt like part of me was frozen on that ice, left behind under the wolf's watchful stare. I wondered if I'd ever feel safe again. Sometimes I thought I saw tracks near my cabin, faint paw prints in fresh snow, leading toward the tree line before vanishing as though the animal had sprouted wings. No one else seemed to notice them, but I'd stand there in the pale dawn, staring at those marks, heart hammering in my chest. I kept imagining the wolf circling my house at night, testing my doors, breathing against the frosted windows. A part of me hated it, wanted it dead, while another part longed to see it again, to understand why it let me live. Was it mercy? Was it instinct? Or had it recognized something in me, the same raw animal hunger to survive? Late one night, I stood on my porch, wind whipping snow across my face, and whispered into the darkness, "I forgive you." The words surprised me as they left my mouth, soft and trembling, but real. I didn't know who I was forgiving, the wolf or myself. But somehow, in that moment, the icy air felt a little less heavy, and I turned back inside, leaving the footprints behind me to fade into the snow. The seasons rolled forward, dragging me along whether I was ready or not, until the ice finally melted and the sea outside Nome breathed again under grey Alaskan skies. My arm would never be what it once was. The doctor said the nerves were too damaged, and sometimes my fingers curled into a useless claw without warning. But somehow, I learned to live with it, shaping new routines around what I'd lost. I started volunteering at the local wildlife center, talking to people about predator behavior and teaching kids how to respect the wilderness instead of fearing it. The first time I stood in front of a class, my voice shook so badly I thought I'd faint, but as I spoke about the wolf, the kids leaned forward, eyes wide, and I realized my story could mean something. I wasn't just a man who'd been attacked. I was a man who'd survived. And slowly, that became enough for me to keep waking up each day. I found purpose again in the way people listened, the way they asked questions that made me think deeper. My scars were still there, but they felt lighter somehow, as if telling the story drained some of the poison out of the memory. One early winter evening, I decided to return to the same stretch of ice where it all happened, driven by a need I couldn't name. The sun hung low and red over the pines, bleeding color into the snow like fire spreading through paper. I wore the same parka, though its left sleeve hung looser now, empty space where muscle used to be. My boots crunched over the ice, each step echoing like distant gunshots in the silence. I found the exact spot where my blood had stained the ice, though of course the snow had long since covered it. I stood there, staring at the horizon, waiting for fear to claw at my chest. But instead, I felt only a vast quiet, the kind that stretches out like the ocean beneath the ice. The wind carried a scent I knew too well, pine, salt, and something wild. I closed my eyes, breathing it in, letting it settle into my bones. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged out here again, as if the land itself had forgiven me for trespassing into its hidden places. That's when I saw movement at the tree line, a silent ripple of pale grey fur among the dark trunks. My breath caught in my throat as the wolf stepped out into the open, the same streaks of black across its flanks, its golden eyes sharp as winter stars. A jagged scar now slashed across its muzzle where my knife had struck, a pink line glistening under the fading sun. It was thinner than before, ribs faintly visible beneath its thick coat. Yet it held itself with quiet power, every step measured and deliberate. We stared at each other over the flat white space, predator and prey no longer, but something else entirely. My pulse thudded in my ears, not with fear this time, but with awe. The wolf tilted its head slightly, as if recognizing me, as if remembering the ice, the blood, the moment we both decided not to die. I wanted to raise my hand in greeting, but my arm trembled too much. So I stood there, heart pounding, and let the silence speak for both of us. The wolf did not charge. It did not growl. Instead, it sniffed the air, gave one slow blink and turned back toward the trees, melting into the shadows as quietly as it had come. For a long time, I stood frozen, tears blurring my vision as the wind howled softly over the ice. I realized then that we had spared each other, the wolf and I, each of us choosing life instead of the endless blood-soaked logic of predator and prey. I understood that my survival wasn't just luck or fate. It was the result of a decision made in that breathless instant when the wolf chose not to finish me. And I realized that I, too, had been given the chance to choose, to live, to forgive, to keep moving forward. The ice felt solid beneath my feet. The sun felt warm even as it slipped behind the mountains, and my scars, for the first time, felt like badges instead of curses. I wiped my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," into the empty air. Now, whenever people ask me why I'm not afraid of the wilderness anymore, I tell them the truth, that I met the eyes of a wolf who could have killed me, and somehow we both walked away. The attack didn't just break me, it rebuilt me into someone who sees the wild not as an enemy, but as a mirror reflecting the fiercest parts of my own soul. I still carry pain, and sometimes I still wake screaming, but there's a new strength in the way I breathe, in the way I stand beneath the cold stars. I believe we're all animals at heart, driven by hunger, fear, and the instinct to survive, but also by the capacity for mercy. And in that moment on the ice, mercy won. I don't fish the way I used to, but I still walk the tundra, listening for the whisper of paws in the snow. Because out there, under the endless sky, I feel alive in a way nothing else can match. And that day, the wilderness didn't just leave a scar on my body, it carved a truth into my soul.